Good morning, Emily.
Is it, in fact, a good morning?
Okay, what storm clouds have come to the podcast today?
Well, in looking at the state of things recently, I've been having a lot of deep conversations about money with folks, and I have some topics that I think are going to be a bit tougher than usual.
I do like a challenge, so what are we talking about?
Is being frugal empowering or limiting? Is long term planning actually possible? And is it ethical to build wealth in a world with inequality?
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. Empowering, yes, and also yes. Bam. See, you said this was going to be challenging, but I think this is going to be super easy. Barely an inconvenience.
Yeah, not everything is black and white, Dad. Maybe for you. But, okay, we're talking about the frugal thing first. As you know, I have my weird money scripts. We've touched on those before in the podcast. On the one hand, I love to spend money on a trip with my sister, but on the other hand, I'm rinsing out and reusing my Ziploc bags at home. That's not necessary. You do pay me enough to just purchase new Ziploc bags, but I've got these old money scripts and ideas and just habits that I'm really stuck to. So I wanted to talk about that today because you always lovingly pick on me for that, and so does everyone else in my life. But, there's the example. You can drive 10 miles further to get gas that's 5 cents cheaper. You're not actually really winning anything there. And we see people do similar things with like, oh, I found another high yield savings and it's, 0.25% higher interest rate. So I moved all my money over to get more. And they're always doing these little things, driving farther for cheaper gas. So I want to hear your opinion on that more specifically. Is it really that bad to do that, even if it's not the best use of your time? I mean, it's not the end of the world.
The best use of time is interesting as a framing there because there's a sort of background element here of like what is the value of your time, and that really just gets into opportunity cost. Really, what you've actually teed me up for here is a great discussion of my dissertation theory, which was economics of information. So you've walked into my trap. The basic answer to your question here is sort of, what is the value of your time? What is the opportunity cost? So let's say you're unemployed or you're between jobs, or you're a student, you're a young person, whatever it is, you have essentially more time than money, generally speaking, in that context, because your time is not being purchased, right, through a job, hourly wage, salary, whatever, in such that you have a trade off to be made there, right? You just have nothing but time and you have money, and money is the more finite resource in that context. And so for that person, right, driving the extra distance to save money on the gas or rinsing the Ziploc bags and so on is time well spent, money well saved, and so on. But as you move up on sort of the income spectrum, your time becomes more valuable, right? Like if I boil my time down like to the absolute second, every hour of my time is essentially worth like $158. Like that is the actual cost, money spent to provide me with my salary, my benefits, my the technology, all the stuff that my time is used on in a professional capacity. And so if I spend an hour washing Ziploc bags or half an hour driving to go get 10-cent cheaper gas, right, I'm wasting, right, $75, $80 just by spending that time when I could just go to the gas station that much closer, get it done in 5 minutes, right, and spend the extra 10 cents, 5 cents a gallon, whatever. And so it just becomes really a question of like, what is the value of your time versus the cost of the thing you're trying to save money on.
But what if you are maximizing the time you're driving to get cheaper gas and I'm listening to an incredibly educational podcast on the way? Do you ever factor in other things like that, or that's getting way too complicated and it's like, listen, just at a certain point, pay for the convenience?
I mean, that's a net question, right? So you bring up, listening to the podcast, maybe also the cheaper gas is on the way to a store you also need to stop at anyway. Like it becomes a question of what is the net gain, net loss thing. When I look at your Ziploc bag example, it's even less about like the opportunity cost so much as like, what is the risk that you don't clean it sufficiently and you get sick off of it? And then what is the cost of like getting sick or feeling unwell or whatever that is that could be caused by like an insufficiently cleaned bag? All of that to say there comes a point where you do start to have more money than time, right? If you are successful in your career or are fortunate in your life, such that then you are willing to exchange money for time, right? Somebody can clean my house, somebody can mow my lawn, somebody can wash my car, etc. And I'm willing to spend money for time because now I have more money than time. So there's an equilibrium between these. It's not to say that being frugal is a good thing or a bad thing. It's contextual. Being frugal makes a lot more sense when you don't have a lot of money or a lot of income to be offset because of that frugality. And in turn, frugality becomes limiting when your time is more valuable or more constrained.
Hmm. All right. Well, how do you go about kind of changing your thinking then? Because we do meet with a lot of people who have been good savers their whole lives, and they're at that point where they're right around retirement, and it's super super hard for them to then transition from no longer saving money, but they are in fact spending out of their retirement accounts, which is the whole point of them. It's okay, but it's a very tough mindset switch for people.
I think the easiest thing to do is not to really think about the money itself. It is to instead think about the income that the money provides. So I think like the sort of best psychology you could have around your retirement savings as a retiree or somebody going into retirement is not to think about the lump sum and how much money is in there, how much money you're making, how much money you're spending, losing, whatever. It's to just think about the money that comes to you every month or every other week or however you have it set up, and to go ahead and treat that as permission that should be spent in that month, in that week, etc. I think it becomes problematic when people either eyeball their retirement balance too frequently, or, and I think this is the more destructive version, where people piggy bank it. And sometimes it's unavoidable, like just like a big expense comes up, and you gotta just pull out extra money for that big expense. But I think a lot of people make the mistake of wanting to have kind of their maximum retirement income distribution occur from their accounts based on just like what's sustainable, and at the same time then don't save a single cent of it in the interim so that they never have any money left over for when something comes along. And there's some like innocent versions of this. Somebody is taking out $3,000 $4,000 a month, they're living on it, they're spending every dime they take, and then they want to take a vacation and they've not set any money aside in their cash flow to account for that. So then their vacation becomes an extra that was otherwise not really reserved. And when the budget and everything was set up in the planning phase, vacations were baked into it, but they have not thought about those one-off random ad hoc expenses as part of their monthly cash flow and expenditures. And so they end up sort of double dipping, where they not only spend 100% of their budgeted cash flow from their portfolio, but then they also spend quote unquote double, right, on that vacation item or something like that, to go ahead and take extra money out for that one-off thing.
Hmm. So if that happens several times, do you then kind of stop and take a look at the regular distribution rate and perhaps adjust it? Or it's more about adjusting your lifestyle at that point and saying, hey, okay, this is actually not optimal?
I mean, I think you have to kind of adjust to it as you can. Like, it's easy for me as a financial planner to just say, like, this is the best practice. Just do it and you'll be fine. It's sort of like a doctor saying, eat right and exercise. Like, if only it were so easy. I think the basic thing here is to try to have a sort of transition of trust, in that at a certain phase of your life, you were really focused on accumulating wealth. And so you never really had to think about spending it down. And on the other side of that, as you get to this, living on your wealth phase, you need to sort of make a leap to being a person who is sort of disinterested in the wealth element of how much money is saved, and who is more interested in the quality of life elements, and is willing to spend that money, particularly because we come back to this time cash premium or deficiency balance. When you are reaching a retirement age, typically time is becoming a more premium asset to you, right? You are a little bit older, you're a little bit closer to the inevitable passing that will one day come. And so it helps to be mindful of that insofar as how you're willing to exchange money for time and for quality of life while it's still available to you.
Hmm. Okay. Again, good point. What do you do once, let's say you've turned that corner and you're like, okay, I can spend my money. It's okay. I have permission. We still interact with people and they don't know how to spend it. They can't quite come up with these creative and fun ways to spend their remaining time and money because you've spent your whole life not doing that, and it actually can be hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, this is a case where I look at something like permission to live a little. I'll give a good example. We have some clients who either are currently in or recently went to Italy on a big group trip where they and a bunch of like friends and neighbors and so on went out there. And we were talking about their budget for it, and it was surprisingly low. And I was like, well, given that you are not spending nearly as much as you could in retirement, like why don't you fly first class? And to your point of frugality, the response was like, I know I can afford it. We probably enjoy it, but I got to tell you, Dan, I got such a good deal. Like, I'm just so pleased that I got such a good deal on these flights. And that can be its own form of enjoyment and whatnot. I think if you're underspending what you're able to spend, that is not necessarily an impetus to spend. It's not to just sort of mindlessly consume or distribute wealth just because you can. But it is something where I think it makes sense to sort of kick the tires a little bit on basic parts of your quality of life and go like, huh, if I'm underspending my maximum retirement spending by, let's say, 40%, I'm spending $60,000 when I could be spending $100,000. Could I, shop at Whole Foods for groceries instead of King Supers? Could I get somebody to mow the lawn for me if I don't actually really enjoy doing that? Could I, get a nicer TV? Like, it's just little consumption things where it's like, hey, is there any nominal improvement to your quality of life that this would provide? Where it's not necessarily an ongoing expenditure. It doesn't have to be a thing that you're committed to for life, but it's just a thought of like, hey, you can't take it with you, and for some people that's important. They want to leave behind a legacy or help out their family or do something impactful when they pass on. But I think on the other side of that, if you don't really have philanthropic goals or kids you're trying to help out one day, then I think it makes sense to just really evaluate different parts of your quality of life and decide whether it's a meaningful change or a meaningful difference to enjoy what you've earned.
Hmm. Is this advice that you take for yourself personally? I know you've fairly openly said on the podcast how much of your income you save and everything. Do you intend to stay that same way?
I have a bad answer to this. I actually just redid that math, and I think the last time I did that math, I was saving 45%, and as of my recalculation yesterday, I'm saving like 67%. So no, as the expression goes, a cobbler's children often wear no shoes. Um, I am the cobbler's children, I guess. Yeah, in that particular sense, I do have objectives. Like there are goals that the savings is going towards. So it's not just like mindless savings. I'll put it this way: I'm saving more than I used to, but I have a specific thing that it's for now, and so there is a benefit to it insofar as yes, I'm saving more, but there's a reason to it. Versus I was saving a lot already because I didn't know what to do with it. So for better or worse, like it is actually simultaneously not, living as much as I could, but for a good reason.
And when you reach your financial goal, whatever it is, you're going to follow through and actually do it? Or do you think you'll keep moving the goalpost?
I'll definitely do it. It'll be an open question as to whether I then reiterate the goal, right? Where it's like, okay, I reached this, but now there's a bigger, better version of it that I could do another like 10, 15 years down the road. Or, this took me 5, 6 years to do. It's done. Now I want to do something else. I don't know the answer to that. I'll figure it out when I get there. But in that sense, right, today there's an objective 5, 6 years out there, saving for it, gonna accomplish it, gonna be pleased as punch when I do, and we'll see what happens then.
Hmm. Very exciting. I'm sure we'll be psyched to check in a few years and see what happened there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you will be a direct beneficiary of it when that time comes. So, look forward to it in all its ambiguity.
And I don't get to know what it is, though.
You actually know what it is. I'm just not going to say it on the podcast.
Oh, okay. Well, and not on that note, don't worry. Here comes my smooth transition then to save you to topic number 2. Is long-term planning truly possible in uncertain times? I get tons of questions from people about a variety of topics. Is Social Security still going to be there for me when I'm old? And what's going on with all these tariffs and the politics in the world? And the housing market is doing this and that, and everything under the sun. So, how can you even begin to make a long term financial plan with all these uncertainties that nobody, ourselves included, know exactly what's going to happen with all this?
There's an old military expression which is no plan survives contact with the enemy. And that's how I sort of view all the uncertainty factors, right? Like as financial planners, we have to forecast. Forecasting requires assumptions, right? We have to assume rates of inflation, rates of return. We have to assume things about tax policy. We have to assume certain things will remain the same functionally or that certain things will change in a predictable pattern. It's an imprecise science like any other kind of act of prediction. But the exercise of financial planning, the exercise of long term planning is just as important as the iteration of the activities that it points towards, right? Sort of like saying, if we were going to try to travel across the world on foot, could we really draw a line on a map from here to there all the way around the globe and really follow that every single step of the way? Probably not. right? We're going to draw a line across Europe, but then we're going to realize that you can't go into that country, or that you can't go down that particular road or on that particular trail, and it just becomes a question of adaptability. Have you not only built a plan that you're willing to follow and that is aimed towards the objective you're trying to reach, but also are you able to be flexible as circumstances inevitably prove to be distinctly different from what was originally expected?
So that's kind of how we always tell people you got to look at your financial plan like a living, breathing document rather than a physical binder that we print out and follow for the rest of our lives.
Well, and yeah, I mean, like, you've seen like the physical binder that my very first financial plan was ever put into. Like, we still have it. And the funny thing about that is, I don't think anything in that binder is accurate today, right? But the people that I built that plan for are more than $1 million wealthier than they were 10 years ago. So, simultaneously, while the expectations of the binder version of the first plan have proven false in pretty much every regard, we have done and iterated financial planning activities and positive financial behaviors over the last decade such that they are $1 million wealthier than they used to be. And that says something, right? There is value to the activity of iteration, of deliberately pursuing long-term objectives, right? Not sort of saying, well, I had one particular plan and it didn't go accordingly, so I dropped it by the wayside and I'm never going to ever revisit it again or try again. It's like, no, there are guaranteed to be pitfalls and bumps and problems along the way. It's your ability to, go hit the obstacle, reset, go around it, and keep going that really matters, that really helps create the long-term value from planning. Planning itself is not the value. It's the activity of engaging in the process that is the value.
Hmm. Okay, well, are there certain things then that you think it's really important for people to stay up to date on? Because, they can't control them anyway. And I know a lot of people who are just, I don't even want to read the news then, or I don't care. I'm not going to keep track of it. I can't control it anyway. So I'll just react when I need to.
Uh, I think most people are actually going to be better off not paying attention to it, and not because it's unimportant, but because your knowledge of the things is more likely to cause you to make mistakes or emotional responses than it is to complement your ability to attain the outcome.
So there's no need to hyper fixate on the news apps and different things that are happening in the world if there's nothing you can do about it, just for the average Joe anyway.
I mean, I want to be careful about this because I think current events have demonstrated that a lot of people are having their lives affected in pretty dramatic ways and in pretty serious ways, right? There's people being arrested and deported. There's people who are being laid off. There's companies that are opening, closing. Stuff's happening in current events that I think it would be very privileged of me to just say, oh, just ignore all of that and to sort of stick your head in the sand. When it comes to, however, something like financial planning, particularly if you have a financial planner, like let it be their job to pay attention to that stuff for you. You're probably going to be happier and have a better outcome if you are not hyper fixating on it or reacting to current events in a serious sense, or letting current events drive your activities. I think it's one of the most common mistakes is there's a difference between kind of running into an obstacle and adjusting accordingly versus running into an obstacle and like slamming on the brakes and saying we got to completely redo everything. Like nothing is true anymore. I think there's a huge difference between those two activities, even though they might be triggered by the same event. It's a question of degrees.
Okay. So be flexible, be able to pivot, but also maybe don't check the balance of your 401k every single day.
I'd never check the balance of your 401k every single day. I don't do it, right? Just don't do that. What I will throw out there, and again, I want to highlight that there's sort of a privilege in me saying this, but when you think about like current events from let's say 5 or 10 years ago to now, how many things are really different today than they were 10 years ago that are based on a current event that occurred somewhere along the way, such that it has materially adjusted your financial path or trajectory? For some people, you're going to be able to point to a very specific thing, like I graduated college within the last 10 years. Like before I was a poor student, now I'm a successful professional. Sure. Some people are going to say, hey, I got married, or my partner passed away, or I had kids, or our kids moved out. Like there are life events. But when I say current events, like there was a big market crash in Q4 of 2018. If anybody listening to this knows immediately why that happened, and knows exactly what happened to their portfolio, knows exactly what they did to pivot at that time, I would be shocked. 3 years ago, 2022, the market essentially slid for 9 or 10 months straight, essentially. And same sort of thing. Like there were big, important things happening at the time, but I think most people today listening to this would struggle to articulate what caused that and what happened. And so, from a planning standpoint, right back to the core question, is it possible to do long term planning? Yes. And it's possible to follow a long term plan over a long period of time. You just have to be mindful of sticking to your plan as a general strategy versus being highly reactive at a tactical level.
Okay. Well, that just solidifies the need for us to also coach our people and keep them calm during these times because it's definitely something we encounter.
Yeah, it's funny. Somebody recently asked in a financial planning like chat group, essentially, how do you answer people when they ask you like how are things going? How's the market? How's the business? How's the life of being a financial planner or whatever? And the universal answer everybody gave was some version of it's great. And that was just sort of the standalone statement, like, oh, hey, is it tough being a financial planner right now? No, there's tons of stuff to do and things to take advantage of and activities to enjoy. Like, it's a good time to be a financial planner. Aren't you worried about this stuff? Nope, not really. Right, because we as planners train ourselves to have such a long-term view of most things that current events, though important and things that we have to keep in mind from a professional standpoint, are just not really that important iteration by iteration, piece by piece.
Okay. Well, that kind of exhausts my thoughts on that topic. So, guess what? We're on to number three, Dan. Is it
The
ethical?
ethics.
Yes, your favorite thing. Is it ethical to build wealth in a world with inequality? I know several people, one in particular, I know you know who I'm talking about, who I have this conversation with on a regular basis. And one person, in fact, is so firmly on one side that they're like, I just feel bad even investing at all and taking advantage of these gains that I could get in the stock market because I don't feel that it's ethical and things like that. How do you even begin to address those concerns and have that conversation?
Are you asking from like a social standpoint or from a professional standpoint?
Oh, both, but let's go professional right now.
From a professional standpoint, the simple answer is that's not my problem. And what I mean by that is like it's not my job to change somebody's view of the world. It's not my responsibility or my role to convince somebody of the existence of gravity. Um, you have to have sort of a basic agreement about the presuppositions of financial and economic reality before you ever have a professional relationship with somebody. Now, there are professionals who specialize in that, right? Financial therapists, financial counselors, people who really focus more on money psychology, money values, really digging into what we believe and why, and finding an equilibrium between our deeply held personal beliefs and practical realities, and trying to align those in a constructive way. So there's a profession out there that really focuses on that. But for me as a financial planner, if I'm working with you as a professional, we have to have a baseline understanding and acceptance that money is not an intrinsic good or bad, but that the avoidance of money or guilt or shame about money are generally not constructive things in the context of your personal needs.
Hmm. So maybe go kind of following that thread more of like, it's okay to put your own oxygen mask on first before anyone else. Like, it's not, there's nothing inherently evil about saving for your own retirement. And that includes investing and taking advantage of, the gains of the market over the years.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a basic thing here. You use the oxygen mask metaphor. I think it's a little overused, but it's one that we are all familiar with. I think there's a classic cycle of sort of deliberate self-sacrifice that becomes selfish as time goes on. So it's the person, for example, who has family members who are struggling, and so they spend all their money or they give all their money away to help their family members who are struggling. Maybe it's a parents, sibling, person with a disability, somebody that they care about, or a group of people that they care about, and they spend all their money helping these people, getting these people the help that they need, getting them ahead, helping them be okay in life, etc., etc., and they forego personally responsible things like saving for retirement or having an emergency fund, or they're even more self-destructive. They will give away money they don't have, right? They'll borrow money to help the people in their lives. And there are practical reasons that this sometimes just has to happen. So I don't want to say that it's a universally bad behavior, but there are people out there who will do this sort of ad infinitum, right? They will never stop the cycle of giving and self sacrificing. And one day they will need help because they will reach a point where they are no longer able to support themselves, no longer able to work, right? Or they will have put themselves in such a deep hole that now their willingness to help others becomes a burden to others. In that now they are the parent who has to move in with their kids, or they are the person who needs the state to pay for their long term care, or they are a person who essentially now is always in a position to be borrowing money because they've reached a point where they've given all their money away so much that now they have nothing to show for it. And so this self-sacrificial behavior can be really, really destructive, even if it's well intended.
Right. So it's a little bit of reframing there that taking care of yourself is also taking care of your loved ones and your community, essentially, so that you can theoretically not have to rely on them one day.
And I'm cautious about sort of implying that the inverse is the most important thing. Like there's the effective altruism thing that was a sort of in vogue for a minute there until the SBF sort of ruined it with the FTX scandal and whatnot. But there's a basic version of effective altruism, which is, look, I'm going to take care of myself so that I have no needs in a material sense, or no unmet needs. And then when I've gotten myself to a healthy place, I'm going to use my ability to support myself and the excess of that to support others and help others. And that is a little bit more of the put your oxygen mask on first perspective, but it also provides two things. One, though it delays your ability to immediately support others or help others or self-sacrifice for others, it means that you are not likely to become a burden to others later, where your net positive might be washed out by your net negatives. Instead, you are sort of doing the work to ensure that you never become a net negative, and then using the excess positivity of your wealth or your affluence or your means or your influence to make a difference. And I think that's a much more responsible approach to something like the subject of, is it ethical to build a wealth in a world with inequality?
Hmm. Okay. And I mean, also, if you still have qualms like that, there are places that kind of specialize in more personalized investing and they're willing to kind of tailor your portfolios and stuff to what your personal ethical values are, right?
Absolutely. So there's the whole theme of ESG or SRI investing. We've talked about this before, so I won't go too deep into it. But the basic idea here being that you're going to invest in a way that aligns with your beliefs or values. I'll give a very easy example here. If you are a foundation that funds research to try to cure lung cancer, you would probably be unhappy or feel ill at ease with the idea of investing in tobacco companies, right? Just basic setup here. Here's the thing we're trying to fix, and we're somehow taking money or profiting off the profits of companies that cause a lot of this problem. We don't want to be a part of that. That's fine. I think a lot of people self sabotage with this unnecessarily, insofar as they'll have really strong beliefs about certain things and think that how they invest is going to somehow effectuate change in that thing. I think that's a very impractical approach to it, that where you can do a lot of sort of opportunity cost self-sacrifice. Imagine, for example, you said, a couple of years ago that you think AI is, too environmentally destructive, right? It consumes too much energy. You're worried about what it's doing to children or people's ability to think. You have any number of objections to AI. And so you decide that you're going to divest of all tech stocks because you really just want to not be involved in AI at all. Well, that's a belief you can have, but you would have missed out on a substantial 20-30% increase in your wealth in those tech assets over the last year or two, simply by wanting to sort of lodge your unheard protest against AI by not investing in the companies that may or may not be involved in AI. So it's sort of a messy thing where I understand people investing along their beliefs or values. I understand not wanting to support things. We have clients where we don't invest in private prisons for them, or we don't invest in weapons manufacturing for them because they don't want to see the world be a worse place, or they don't like the sort of systemic inequities and issues with those types of industries. We're happy to support that for clients. We just want to be mindful that it's not sort of a protest without purpose when people make that election versus just a statement of values that really has no throughput.
Hmm. Yes, that makes sense. You just be careful that, the big companies aren't probably going to notice your one little protest, but also your personal values are important and can be planned around.
And this is also just a tricky thing. If there's the direct element of what you want to invest in, but when you avoid broad index type things, like you don't want to invest in the S&P 500 or the total stock market because they're going to hold those companies or those things you don't like about them, then you're forced into sort of sector based or thematically based alternatives. And not only do they tend to not perform as well as broad indexes over time, but also they tend to be a lot more expensive. So you can sort of cause a double problem where not only are you missing out on some of the upside from those things you don't like, but also you're sort of overpaying for the privilege of avoiding them. So it's just something to be mindful of.
Hmm. Okay. All right, that makes sense. I think that's the the extent of my personal thoughts and questions on this anyway. I don't know if you have any more to add.
Well, I thought we were still just talking about the professional half of the subject.
Oh, do you want to go into social too? Because we certainly can.
I mean, we can if you want. I'm sure your friend
Okay.
would be delighted to hear my disagreeable opinion on this.
Yeah, let's hear it, Dan. Tell me more about your thoughts and opinions on the social side of this, not just the professional side.
I think too many people overemphasize problems that are beyond their ability to affect, and in so doing, are functionally feeding into the interests of those who do not share their beliefs or their kind of ideas. So there's a very realpolitik sort of take on this, but let's say you are a person who really believes that everybody should have equality, right? Somebody who really focuses on equality over merit, and we don't need to get into an argument about like what constitutes merit, but you're on the side of the argument that says like I believe in equality and good outcomes for everybody, and everybody deserves justice and food and shelter and everything that goes into it. Like you're a very humanist type of person. I think when you fail to play the game within the boundaries of the system that you occupy and the rules that sort of govern that system, you simply are conceding the game to parties that are not interested in your values or the outcomes you're looking for. Right. It's like when you say like I'm not going to save, I'm not going to invest, I'm not going to build wealth or gain influence because I think it's unfair that I could have more of that than others. I think there's somebody else who is willing to take advantage of the fact that you're not going to play the game, and they will get ahead and you will not, and then they will use the influence that getting ahead provides them to perpetuate this system that you disagree with, and you will have neither the influence or the resources to effectuate the outcome you're hoping to obtain.
Okay, so it's would be similar to maybe choosing not to vote because you just don't like politics or the two candidates they're running or whatever. But in reality, you're just not voting, not participating, and not getting a say.
Yep. I mean, that's a very basic analogy to it. But yeah, it's the basic thing here of like, look, you can disagree with the nature of the game. You can disagree with the rules, the laws, the systems that are in place. You can be anti-capitalist. You can be anti-democratic. You can have whatever beliefs you want in that sense. But I always like to go back to a question that was posed of the band Rage Against the Machine back in the '90s, where somebody said, you've got these double platinum records. You're making all this money selling records, but isn't that just feeding into the capitalistic system that all your music is opposed to? And the answer from the lead singer De La Rocco essentially was, the message will be conveyed along the channels and lines and means that are available in the system as it exists today, not the system as we would wish it to be. Right? Like it's not, we're not absolving ourselves of our responsibility for participating in a capitalist system, but we don't have an alternative. So we can either be heard through a capitalist system or we can be ignored by trying to somehow exist outside of it.
So you can still be an anti-capitalist investor.
Well, and I mean, here's the funny thing. I think, and this could get us into a very long conversation, so we don't need to go too deep. I think when most people say they're anti-capitalists, really what they are is anti-cronyist or anti-nepotistic. They are anti-autocratic. They are opposed to a inequitable system in which people with money leverage the money they have to continue to perpetuate their advantage, and they are opposed to because sort of the tacit corruption and problems that causes. But I think very few people are opposed to a system in which you create a good or provide a service and you are compensated for that, and then in return you use that compensation to purchase goods and services from others. There's a very simplistic version of capitalism, which is, and this goes to Adam Smith, I think it's Wealth of Nations, but essentially he says, the butcher does not butcher and the baker does not bake for your good, but to provide for their own, and in so doing provides you with a needed good. And I think that's something that's very easy to sort of miss the forest for the trees when it comes to problems in capitalism and say, I'm opposed to the fact that there's inequities caused by capitalism, but they're not really caused by capitalism. They're caused by people taking advantage of the system of capitalism to effectuate non-capitalist things like cronyism.
Hmm. You've thought about this before.
Yeah, just a little bit. These are also, by the way, like I am not like a deep philosopher on this subject. I've just done enough reading on the subject to understand the nature of the problem. And there's somebody who would listen to this and be like, well, I'm really actually quite a genuine Marxist. I don't really care what your rationalizations are for capitalism. We should have a moneyless, propertyless society in which everybody just shares universally and equally. And that's a belief you can have. And my only push pull to that would be, well, unfortunately, everybody who's tried it so far has done a really poor job of it. So I wish you luck in your pursuits, but history is not really on your side.
Dan the history buff shows up again in the podcast.
I have a literal degree in history. Like, I have read a lot of books.
You certainly have. You are the king of reading books and coming in and telling us about them.
Case in point, I read a terrible book this week, and the review is on the blog as of the listening of this last week.
I'm sure that will send everyone that way. Your book reports are always interesting, to say the least, I think.
I really wish I read more books that I thought were good by the time I was done with them, but that's a totally different conversation.
Maybe you're reading the wrong type of books.
Not to go down this rabbit trail too much, I don't think it's the type of book. I think it's that there's not a lot of original thought in the finance field right now, and we're starting to see a lot of regurgitation of the same things over and over.
Ooh, that does make me want to read your book report.
Have at it. It's 3,800 words.
Oh. All right, I'll do that after this.
Enjoy. Well, if we're done picking at the idea of ethical wealth building in a world of inequality, I think you know what time it is.
What did Emily learn since the last time I was on the podcast?
Terrific question to ask yourself, Emily. Please go on.
It's not technical this time again, so get psyched. It's much more human focused. And that is it's a broad topic, so I'm not going to go too into it because I could talk about it for an hour. You know how I am. But I've recently put a little bit more effort, personally and professionally, into like truly connecting with people that I have a lot in common with and can learn a lot from, because I think it's really important to spend time with people that are very different from you. I'm big on that. And sometimes I go too far that way, and then I spend too much time doing that, and I forget about like the core people, personally and professionally, that I also need to nurture and spend time with. So I've been trying to recenter in that way, and I'm trying to be vague and not call out specific people in the podcast. But it's really, really important not to forget the core people and to keep nurturing relationships, because they will go away, even if they're, like a close friendship or close professional connection. You're like, oh, I don't need to spend time on that. They'll understand that I've been busy. Yes, they will, but they will also, pull away. But that's human nature. And so I've been refocusing my energy and reminding myself about that in my time.
Not to torture a sort of parallel to this, right? But there's that observation that your kids don't really care, like what kind of car you drive or what kind of house they grow up in, but they really care if you come to their baseball games. Like, there's sort of this value to being present, even when the time may not feel particularly well spent, because relationships are about personal connection, not about what the relationships otherwise create or bring to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to keep myself very, very busy. My calendar is always very full, and I almost have to time block and be like, and spend time with your close friends.
Yeah, I think it's probably the best time we spend.
Yeah. Yes, I had a very good weekend.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.